All right, today we're going to talk about the progressive presidents. Remember, this is the progressive unit. Okay, so we'll talk about the progressive presidents and the things that they did to try to make progress to help us. And there's so many things that they did 100 years ago that still affect us today. It kind of makes you wonder, like, what are we going to do today that's going to affect us 100 years from now? Okay, so of the progressive presidents, this is William Howard Taft, and there's a story about him that certainly you've all heard before. Okay, so there's the president before him, though, is Theodore Roosevelt. Okay, so this is Theodore Roosevelt, who, if you've seen, you're probably like, oh, he looks familiar. Well, if you've seen A Night at the Museum, he is in that show. So this is the story about William Howard Taft. That is this guy. Okay, William Howard Taft, the president. He was quite a large man. In fact, he's such a large man that this was the bathtub that had to be made for him in the White House. Okay, there's a myth, political urban myth, that he got stuck in the bathroom at the White House. I don't think he really got stuck in the bathtub, because that's hard to think about. Like, how would you really get stuck in the bathtub? They just took the old bathtub out, okay, because he was such a big guy. Now, how big of a dude was he? Well, look at the kid on the other side. So there's the picture of Theodore Roosevelt in the background. And then you see the little kid with the shaved head, right? That's a kid. He's like 10 years old. And this is the bathtub. This looks like one of those indoor swimming pools that you see advertised on TV. Okay, so he just wanted a bigger bathtub. Whenever he left and they remodeled the White House, they literally had to break this thing into 4 pieces so it would fit out the door, okay, when they were done with it. But that's William Howard Taft, right? Just one of those facts. We'll get to more about him later. This is a bull moose. This will come in handy later, right, in the presentation. Remember, this is a bull moose. Well, check out those horns, man, the antlers. Those things are incredible. Okay, bull moose. All right, this is Woodrow Wilson. This guy looks really nerdy, okay? We're going to talk more about him next semester. He did some stuff that in today's world, looking back on it with our 2020 goggles on it, the stuff that he did is like, oh my, this is crazy. But we'll get to that next semester. This is where he was the president of, before he became the governor of New Jersey and then the president of the United States. So Theodore Roosevelt, right? He's president number 26. That's why it's got that number 26 up there. He grew up wealthy, right? But had a tough life, right? So in 1884, his mom and his wife died on the same freaking day. Okay. But like we've been talking about all semester, even with a 5-question Friday, is like, and with Andrew Jackson was another example, and Abraham Lincoln, man, sometimes things aren't good. And like you have to overcome those things. And that's what he did. He overcame that. So he was an extremely popular president. He was a president from 1902 to 1909. Those numbers are a little off there because he took over as president for William McKinley, who, when we do the imperialism unit, you'll see what happened with him. But McKinley was assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt took over for him. And there was an attempt on Theodore Roosevelt's life as well. He actually got shot while he was giving a speech, and he didn't stop giving the speech. He kept going. He got shot right here in the heart, and he had like a case of some sort inside of his suit pocket that helped protect them, but he was still bleeding, and he didn't stop giving the speech. Again, that'll tell you like how tough this guy was. He became leader of the progressives, like he was the leader of the progressives, a lot like Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner were leader of the radical Republicans. He was the leader of the progressives, which later became known as the Bull Moose Party. They're going to come back because they asked him. I'll get to that in just a second. Okay, so this is Taft, right? He's a large dude, a very large guy, especially for those times. Even for today, he's a big guy, right? So he was handpicked by TR, that's Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt was so popular, okay, that he was able to handpick his successor. Teddy Roosevelt could have, if he wanted to, run for re-election in 1908, but he chose not to. There were no rules that kept him from doing that. Those rules didn't come in until Truman in like 1948 or 49. So he could have done it, right? But he chose not to do it. But then he changed his mind 4 years later because he got into a little scuffle here with Taft, right? So Taft had problems with the progressive Republicans. They thought he wasn't Republican enough. He wasn't progressive enough. Really what his problem was is that he wasn't Teddy Roosevelt, okay? He passed more progressive legislation than Roosevelt did, but that he just didn't have the personality of Roosevelt. Roosevelt was very well liked by everyone, and then Taft was okay, but he just wasn't like this unbelievable personality. In fact, when he ran for office, he didn't even leave. He didn't even like campaign around the country. He stayed in Ohio, and people came to him. That's just the way he was. So it says there that he was the heaviest president. He weighed in at 332 pounds. Okay, that's 100 pounds more than me. Right? It's more than 100 pounds more than me. That's crazy. Okay, he is the president. If you've ever been to a baseball game, that's the reason for the seventh inning stretch. He loved baseball, and he went to the Washington Senators games all the time. And he was so big that he was real uncomfortable sitting in those old rickety seats. So come about middle of the game somewhere, he'd stand up and stretch out. Well, everybody else, out of respect to him, would do the same thing, and they'd stand up and they'd stretch out, like we do today at the seventh inning stretch. Okay, that came from William Howard Taft. All right, so there's the bathtub, right? That's part of the myth. He didn't get stuck in that thing. That's the new one, a replica of the new one that they built for him. Okay, so this was one of the things that happened during his time in office. Richard Ballinger was the Secretary of Interior. He sold federal lands to his friends in Alaska, which you're not supposed to do. Those lands were rich in minerals, and they thought they definitely had oil. Gifford Pinchot was the director of the Forest Service and was like, you can't do that. Like that, you can't just give away federal land. Okay, he protested the sale of that land, and he wanted Ballinger removed. Pinchot got fired. Okay, Taft released him instead. Well, the progressive Republicans were irate about this, and they rebelled against Taft, and he lost some of his power, right? So politicians lose or gain power through elections, right? You either get reelected or you don't, or you get overwhelmingly elected, right? That's also a way to gain more power. Well, the opposite happened to Taft in the midterm election. So Taft got elected in 1908. He's going to go for reelection in 1912. Well, the midterm is in 1910. Okay. Teddy Roosevelt became outspoken against Taft. Okay. And Taft had lost some of his popularity that Teddy Roosevelt helped him gain. So the progressive Republicans were voted more into office. Okay. They teamed with the Democrats to outvote the Taft Republicans. So there were two different sets of Republicans, right? You had the progressive Republicans and the Taft Republicans. Okay, the Democrats sided with the progressive Republicans and outvoted the Taft Republicans, right? So this midterm election really hurt Taft's power. Like he couldn't get anything done that he wanted to get done. But the Congress, the progressive Republicans could. Okay, so in 1912, they're going to run for reelection. Okay, so this is what I told you earlier. The progressive presidents, and Teddy Roosevelt was progressive and known for it, but Taft was actually more progressive, but he wasn't very well liked. Okay, Taft passed antitrust lawsuits, which broke up. If you guys ever watched The Men That Built America, okay, and they talked about the businesses and the monopolies, right? Well, the monopolies took over the economy of the country, and Taft really fought against them. And he said that you can't form these big mega companies, these trusts, because it eliminates competition. So he was real progressive on that front. He was very progressive in preserving more land. Okay, so places like Yellowstone and our first national parks, well, Yellowstone came in under Roosevelt, but it was a big deal. Well, Taft, as time went on, Taft actually preserved more federal land for forestry and for national parks than Teddy Roosevelt did, but he didn't get the credit for it, partly because he didn't sell himself to get it, right? So Taft and Roosevelt formed this little rift, okay? And so what happens is Roosevelt's going to run for re-election because remember, he can. So in 1912, remember Taft was president from he got elected he didn't get elected. He became president in 1902 when McKinley was shot. He's done in 1909. Okay, he got reelected in 1904. Remember, the elections are in November. He could have run in 1908, didn't. Taft did. So now we are in 1912. Roosevelt says, I'm getting back in. Okay, and he runs as a member of the Bull Moose Party, really as the progressive Republicans. And a reporter said, well, do you think you're capable of doing this? Okay, and at the time, Roosevelt was not very old. He was in his 60s. He was younger than our current politicians. Okay, younger than President Trump, younger than President-elect Biden. Well, he ran for this election in 1912, and they called it the Bull Moose Party because Roosevelt said he was as fit and as strong as a bull moose. Okay, so they became the Bull Moose Party. So in that election, okay, the platform of the Bull Moose Party, they didn't win. Roosevelt doesn't win, but their platform, their ideas were an 8-hour workday, workmen's compensation for workers that are hurt at work. And you saw those conditions in the factory lesson, how terrible the conditions were. Okay. And he wanted the direct election of senators. He wanted the people to be able to elect the senators directly instead of having the state legislatures appoint the senators. Okay. Because that's how it worked. So they wanted the people to be more democratic, right? Progressive, and let the people elect the senators. Okay. So all of those things, even though the Bull Moose Party didn't win, all of those things, 8-hour workday, workmen's compensation for people that are hurt, and direct election of senators, they all happened. The Bull Moose Party didn't get elected, but their ideas went forward. Okay. All right. So in the election, you got really two Republicans. Okay. So you got Taft and you got Teddy Roosevelt. Okay. And then you have the socialist, right? A guy named Eugene V. Debs, who you'll hear more about later. He ran for president like 5 times. Okay. He was a pretty incredible American, really. He just never got elected. And then Democrat was Woodrow Wilson. Okay. So if you think of it as a box, right? Okay. I'll use this book. Okay. So if you think of it, right, and if we cut this book in half and you've got everything above here are Democrats and everything below here are Republicans, right? It's kind of split half and half. And that's still the way it is today. Okay. So if I take these Republicans and say, all right, so here's the Republicans, we're going to cut that in half, and half of them are going to be for Taft and half of them are going to be for Roosevelt. Well, that means whoever the Democrat is, it doesn't matter who the Democrat is. Keith Padgett could have been the Democrat and I'd have won because there's more support. The Republicans, Teddy Roosevelt, split the vote of the Republicans. That was stupid. It guaranteed that Taft wasn't going to win. Okay, and really guaranteed that he wasn't going to win. And Woodrow Wilson is elected president in 1912. Okay, so Wilson, here he is, look kind of nerdy, right? This guy must be some kind of book nerd. Well, this is Princeton University in New Jersey. He was the president and the leader of Princeton, and then became the governor of New Jersey, and then was elected president in 1912. His first name was Thomas. He chose to go by Woodrow. Who chooses Woodrow over Thomas? I don't know. So it tells you that there. His campaign slogan was a new freedom. Okay, he criticized big business and big government. He passed the Clayton Antitrust Act, which was designed to regulate business, so to make it more available to more people. He created what we know of today as the Federal Trade Commission to make sure that business practices were fair. That still exists. Okay, it's something that's still around. Again, progress. He also set up or helped set up the Federal Reserve System, where we have 12 regional banks. Okay, and it's supervised by a board. So you guys may hear on the news and like, oh, you can get a refinance rate of less than 3%, right? Well, all of those numbers come from the Federal Reserve Bank. They determine that. Okay, the Federal Reserve is very instrumental in our economy today. Okay, so they created Federal Reserve notes to back up our currency. There was a big debate about gold and silver at the time, and this was created to set policy. Okay, so there's 12 banks. So there are 12 banks throughout the United States that lend out money to other banks. So a bank like Commerce Bank here, right up by us, or BMO Harris Bank across the street, right? Scott Credit Union, whatever they are. Those banks get their money from one of these 12 Federal Reserve banks, the one in St. Louis. Okay, the federal government then determines what the percentage is going to be on the loans going out. And right now they're really low. Okay, so the Federal Reserve System was progress, so we don't have to worry about that anymore. Okay, it's set up the rules of what we have today. Okay, so Woodrow Wilson also appointed Louis Brandeis to be a Supreme Court Chief Justice. He was the first Jewish member of the Supreme Court. He's going to win re-election, not Brandeis, but Wilson's going to win re-election in 1916 because World War I was raging and going on, and he promised to keep us out of World War I. He got elected in November, and then in March, he gets inaugurated for his second term. And in April the 6th of 1917, 1917. That's right. We go to war in World War I. Not really his fault. He didn't have much of a choice. We'll talk more about that next semester. Okay, so progressive amendments, right? So if you remember the amendments, 13, 14, 15 were what I call the slave amendments, right? Freedom of slaves, the citizenship of slaves, and the voting rights of black male slaves, even though they're going to be ignored for 75 years. But those were 13, 14, 15. Okay, so you're going to have to know these in like 2 words or less, right? So the 16th Amendment, people directly elect senators, right? So you can use direct senators. You can say direct election. Okay, the state legislators don't do it. This makes it more democratic. That's progressive, right? Give the people more of a say. 17th is income tax. Boo! Okay, easy one to remember, but it gave the federal government property or the right, okay, to have income taxes. The 18th Amendment is prohibition. Okay, the temperance movement from way back. Remember all those crazy facts in the Reform Union about people drinking too much. Finally, okay, by 1919, they're going to say, all right, prohibition. We're not going to sell any more alcohol in this country. Okay, we'll see how that goes. The 19th Amendment was women's suffrage. This is the work of the women from the Seneca Falls Convention. Remember Lucretia? Okay, that they're finally going to get the right to vote. Remember, they said it was so controversial. It was 72 years later, after the Seneca Falls Convention, that women got the right to vote. None of the women that were at Seneca Falls ever voted in a federal election because they were all dead by the time it happened. But they started it. Their progress in 1848 made this happen. At least started it. The 20th Amendment is a presidential inauguration date and who succeeds the president. This came in like 1929, somewhere in there. The reason for this partially was because Wilson, at the end of his second term, was having real mental problems because of his age and the stress that he was under. And so there was no real set forth rules. And so that's what this was set up, the 20th Amendment, right? So then the 21st Amendment was the repeal of prohibition. That maybe didn't work so good. So knowing those 16 through 21, if you can commit them to memory, with 2 terms each, that would be good. All right, so all this progress, was it perfect? Well, like anything else we've studied, it has its limits, right? So progressivism redefined the government, right? Like it changed everything, really introduced the idea that the government would do things. Like right now they're talking about the stimulus package and all that stuff. Before this, like that would have never occurred to anyone that the government would do something like that. Okay. This was mostly for people that lived in cities. The farmers didn't really get anything out of this. People in the middle of Illinois certainly didn't feel the effects of this progressive movement. African Americans got nothing. Okay, really? I mean, think about it, right? We're still talking about the age of lynchings. We're still talking about black people can't vote. Even the black men that are supposed to vote with the 15th Amendment, they get nothing. Okay, so the other freedoms and stuff didn't really do anything for African Americans. There was no mention of civil rights progress here. In fact, what I'll show you next semester on Woodrow Wilson is, like I said, it's unbelievable. Okay, so World War I, known as the Great War, ended the focus on domestic issues. We stopped worrying about what was going on at home and worried more about what was happening overseas. Okay, so progressivism wasn't perfect, but boy, it did a lot of good. But it, like I said, wasn't perfect. Okay, so that's the end of this for today. I hope you guys have a great day.